All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Airgap Networks at RSA 2021. My next guest is Mr. Mitch Parker. We're going to talk about IoMT device cybersecurity and agentless ransomware kill switches in the healthcare industry. That's a mouthful, so let's get started. Mr. Mitch, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Let's have your thoughts on Colonial. You know, when I heard it, and I'm of the sense I like to wait to get all the facts right, but when I heard it, it just seemed ominous to me. It seemed different. It seemed more serious. Give me your thoughts on Colonial. What's going on with that?
You're talking about a very large and complex network that you're dealing with. You're dealing with a lot of sensors. You're dealing with a huge amount of devices that have to connect to this network. And Colonial's got a lot to maintain. They've got a lot to do. And to get an attack on a network like that is, well, it is going to take a pretty good root cause analysis to find out what happened. However, I'm looking forward for the lessons learned from this event to hopefully benefit the rest of the industry. I mean, you learn a lot from every one of these attacks, as how bad as it is. I think the biggest thing to think about this is there's a national wildlife refuge right near the egress of that pipeline at the end of it. I am very thankful nothing happened to the wildlife there.
Well, I am too, and I hear what you're saying. You can be positive or negative about anything in life. I think this will be a positive outcome because it's going to make us up our game, isn't it? We got to start jumping in here and taking
absolutely
more seriously. We got to say, hey, I was lucky it wasn't the whole city of New York with no power for 2 weeks, right? I mean, I hear you, but you can also take the other side that it's doom and gloom. But I think we're going to learn from this for sure, no doubt about that. Now, let's talk
absolutely. We learn.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chuck. We learn a lot from auto crashes. We learn from plane crashes. We learn from other events. We learn from these in healthcare. We need to learn from this like we do those.
I agree. Now let's talk about healthcare. We have a lot of ransomware stuff going on in healthcare. And I remember some early healthcare things in Hollywood when I was there, a hospital down the street from the studio. Somebody locked them up. They wanted $1,500. This is 6 years ago, right? It was just kind of starting out. We've heard about QLocker and some other targeted attacks. Are you seeing any sort of specific trends in the healthcare industry that's unique to the healthcare industry when it comes to ransomware?
I think they're getting attacked like everybody else, and people know that these healthcare companies, like everyone else, they are targets, and people are willing to pay. And therefore, people forget, this is a business. This is a multi-million-dollar business. And because of that, there is incentive to attack big businesses and businesses that are more likely to pay than ones that are not. So that's why they're not attacking the buggy whip company. They're attacking the people that have the most to lose.
Absolutely. It is a business, that's for sure. Now, let's look about the root causes of ransomware and propagation. I wonder if there's anything different about the propagation in healthcare. Do we have a different set of employees opening up different sorts of trick emails, or is it kind of the same for everybody as far as ransomware goes?
I tend to think of it as being the same for everybody. I know that there's different types of vulnerable applications that are open on a perimeter. No matter what industry you're in, it's just what vertical is the application on your perimeter targeted towards. Everyone uses VPNs. Everyone gets their credentials leaked. So healthcare is very similar from the outside to any other industry. On the inside, though, you have a lot more openness because you have a lot of devices that need to communicate. And it's pretty much the Wild West on some networks. However, healthcare has been greatly improving lately when it comes to cleaning up and segmenting off networks. There's been a lot of great work been done. However, outside the network, pretty much the same profile. Inside the network, you're going to be a lot different because you have a lot more devices with a lot longer life cycles. It's got more in common with manufacturing than any other industry.
Now, remember when Mission Impossible came out? I think it was the first one 20 years ago. and they assassinated that diplomat because they hacked into his pacemaker. And I was at the studios working at the time, and we saw a screening of that, and I said, "Oh yeah, well that's going to happen someday. That'll never happen. That's not possible." Not only is it now possible, I mean that's a specific attack vector, medical devices, right? Talk to us about any variance in targeting. Are people going after devices specifically, or do they just get caught up in the general ransomware lockdown? Or are we saying, we're going to pull a Tom Cruise and go after a pacemaker?
Well, the deal is, first of all, I remember then Vice President Cheney having the remote access capabilities of his pacemaker disabled, which I think was a good move on his part. I think he saw Mission Impossible.
Right.
And the second part is I don't think people are targeting devices because honestly, if you target someone's pacemaker, you kill them, and that's not good. No one wants to be a murderer. However, they want to get, again, this is a business. They're not here to murder people. They're here to get paid. Yeah. So I think of it this way. It's a business. People who you're going to get more money ransoming a server than you are ransoming someone's pacemaker. And honestly, it comes with the benefit of not potentially opening yourself up for murder.
Well, it's an excellent point. I still wonder why they tinker with healthcare at all, because just like the colonial pipeline, unintended consequences, right? I screw around with the hospital system and something else happens that cascades into devices. So cross our fingers, hopefully that's not going to happen. Let's talk about agentless-based solutions and agent-based solutions. I'm an old physical security guy, but I've learned a lot about cyber over my career. I'm not sure I'm 100% tuned into this. Give us an explanation of those two and why they're a little bit different, and why it's important to understand the difference between the two.
Absolutely. So an agent-based solution means that you have your executable code running on the device, providing scans and providing an attestation and information of the security of the device itself. That's what agent is. Agentless means you have central devices and sensors probing the devices from the outside and providing that outside view, and they may be able to authenticate to the device and provide an inside view as well. However, one has actual executable code running on a device itself, and the other does not and may, however, it may execute code. It'll execute code that's already resident on the device itself as part of the probing process. And it's important to know that difference because in the healthcare industry in particular, a lot of med device vendors do not want additional software loaded on their devices. Again, you're talking about very timing sensitive devices. And if I put something in there that adds 0.5 milliseconds communication to an API, that's someone's life you're potentially holding in your hands there. And you have to be very careful about that. So agentless is often something that healthcare prefers simply because it provides less risk to the patients.
That made perfectly good sense to my small security guy TV brain. Thanks for that explanation. Very well said. Now, let's define zero trust. This is a frustration of mine over the years. Coming from the old physical security world, let's take the studios I worked at. Here was the rule. You can't come in here. But I want to come in. You can't come in. You can't come in unless we say so. The rule was no. No, no, no for everything in the studio for access control, right? And then the cyber guys came along 25 years ago and said, hey, we're going to come up with access control, and we're going to let you in the password or a card. And now all of a sudden they're saying, oh, no, we should trust no one inside our network and authenticate. Really? Why didn't you think about that 25 years ago, right? So I think zero trust is the way to go. I wonder why it took us so long to get there. But zero trust is defined a little differently for everybody, I think. Give us your definition of zero trust.
So I want to define it in terms of one of my favorite TV shows, Jimmy Kimmel. So you want to go see the Jimmy Kimmel show. You've got to go through the guards to even get on the lot in the first place. You've got to then, when you go to where you're going, when you get on the lot, go to the studio itself. You've got to get into the studio. Then you've got to get into the area of the studio where the show is at. Then to get to Mr. Kimmel himself, you've got to go through yet another grouping of security guards. So what it is to me is you have your source, you have your destination, and you have your stops along the path where you trust, where you don't trust, but you verify credentials along every step or gateway of the path between the source and destination, so that you can make sure, using multiple ways and using multiple steps, to make sure that someone just can't go from source to destination and bother Mr. Kimmel.
Now, you don't know this, but I actually set up the security for the Jimmy Kimmel Show back in the day. That was my responsibility when I was 50. So the way you described it creeped me out a little bit, because you got it right. That's exactly what we did, all the different layered approaches to that. Exactly right. I even hired the guard that's on his TV show, his favorite guard. I hired that guy too. So small world that is. All right, great explanation. Let's talk about zero trust in a hospital environment. Is your organization zero trust? And does it work any differently than that? Or are there more special considerations because of the healthcare?
While I cannot answer any direct questions about my employer, I will say that hospitals and health systems are moving towards a zero trust environment, where devices are only given access to what they explicitly need, and they are checked using multiple means to make sure they are where they're supposed to be at. They're sending the data they're supposed to, and they're sending it where they're supposed to be sending it to.
Now, I apologize. I didn't mean to put you on the spot for that. I did mean a generic sense of this, but you said something interesting to me, that healthcare facilities, organizations are moving that way. Why were they not moving that way longer? In the past, is there something unique about them that made it more difficult to move to zero trust?
The issue is the complexity. You have the combination of complexity plus what we call low operating margins in the business. Healthcare has the same operating margins, actually a little bit lower than retail. So the money to do things like this isn't really there. And also the technology to do it the way it needs to be done. DoD had something like this many years ago. However, DoD had significant human resources to address the issue of when you turn a general's computer into a brick, because it couldn't connect to the network. So getting the technology reliable, getting what we needed in place to accurately identify these devices, working with the med device vendors, and being able to do so without tapping scarce resources and limited operational budgets has been a challenge that finally healthcare is starting to overcome.
Well, that's really good news. How would you advise somebody listening to the show to start that journey? Let's say they're not even beginning zero trust, but you may have some background experience in that. What would you advise them to do to kind of get going on this?
I would advise them to get an assessment of their network, get an assessment of their current security state, understand what their assets are, first of all, because you don't put in zero trust without understanding what your assets are in the first place. Get those assessments done, understand how devices communicate, understand what communication channels need to happen, and build a plan to be able to phase this in one step at a time. Zero trust is not something you can switch on. And this is one of the lessons when DoD did something akin to zero trust starting about 20 years ago. That was the biggest lesson. You do it one step at a time. You take a pragmatic, very well tested approach, involve your vendors, and be deliberate. Don't think you can just flip a switch and turn it on, because that's more than likely not going to happen. Ultimately, you have to do so in a way that's not going to interfere with the business. As much as I wish that you could do that otherwise, you have to do it this way. Be deliberate, understand your assets, understand the workflows, understand the risks, understand your business, one step, one stage at a time. And then you'll be able to gradually turn on zero trust the way it needs to be without having to turn it off and cause more issues.
So, honest answer, and I appreciate the candor on that, because it does come down to money often, right? And I think eventually, with all these recent incidents happening, we're going to have to say, listen, either we're going to find the money, or we're going to look at this a different way. That it's really integral to the actually operating budget to have the right security in place, because you can't not be operating because then you have no money. Now, let's talk about a hypothetical. Let's say I give you a budget. I'm your purchasing department, and I say, Mitch, I got whatever money you need to make this happen. uh, and build a zero trust environment. Walk us through how you may have sold this to the board. Let's say you had a hypothetical ransomware incident. How would you have responded to that, or how would you have liked to respond to it, and translate that into a value add for somebody listening? They could say, "Listen, if I had done that, I'd be in better shape today."
So you have an attack like that. The most important thing is to be honest and open about what happened. Don't try and give any hypotheticals. What you do is you are very blunt about what happened. You bring in someone from the outside because ultimately you want to show you're being transparent and open. And when you're transparent and open, you bring in a third party to do some of the work for you to provide that level of analysis. You take that level of analysis, you develop a plan. You talk about what the desired end state was, you relate it back to the root cause of what happened, and you spend a lot of time getting to that root cause and understanding it. And I'm not speaking from experience. I am, however, speaking from the experience of speaking with several other organizations which have experienced attacks, two of which I guarantee you've read about in the news media. And you work with your insurance company, you work with your IR provider for incident response, you work with a third party, you put together a plan for short, medium, and long term, and you start executing on your plan. You take it to your senior leadership, you take it to your board, explain what you're doing, be very clear and very direct about it, and always relate back what you're doing to addressing the root cause and being able to address finding out what happened, and more importantly, preventing it from repeating itself from a combination of tactical, business, and process improvements.
Mitch, I love what you said about being honest about this. I think a lot of times people in management positions that have to bring this news to the board feel like they're going to get their head cut off. It's not necessarily their fault that this happened. It's going to happen to everybody eventually, right? The question is, how do you respond? Is the response the responsible way to do it? Would you say that nowadays the C-level is starting to catch on to this? And when I say catch on, I don't mean here's some money, because they can say here's some money if they want to. But if they don't have the will and the desire to put these things in place, it's just not going to happen. They have to understand the seriousness of it, and the C-level is not always at that place.
I think you're seeing a change with our C-levels. And the reason why I say that is because they're getting bombarded with this. And more importantly, there's a lot of work being done at the level of, I'm going to say, the American Hospital Association, National Association of Corporate Directors, and other groups that support board members and CEOs. I'm seeing a lot more work with these organizations in educating boards and educating C-suite on cybersecurity. And the fact is, cyber attacks have happened to some pretty large companies with some pretty large cybersecurity budgets. If it can happen to them, it can happen to anyone. The ultimate question is, how well, as an organization, can you respond to these issues?
What I always found interesting recently is, and I don't remember the numbers, and you may have a better idea than I do, but let's say an average ransomware attack is costing a big company at least $1 million, right? I don't think it's going to cost you $1 million to put in some kind of zero trust policy or procedure. It's arduous. It's going to be a long time to happen in healthcare because of the legacy systems. I get that. But really, it's you pay now or you pay later. That's kind of my feel on this. What do you think?
So here's my thought, is the cost of any system you put in place is less than what you will pay for the eventual cleanup of a ransomware attack.
Right.
The ransom itself is one component, and the cost of recovery is significantly higher than the cost of the ransom itself eventually.
I could see some in the healthcare sector. It sounds implausible in one way because we think of healthcare as always being there for everybody. It's something we take for granted. I could see some healthcare systems going out of business if this got too big for their budgets, too big for the loss of trust, right? Because really, healthcare, security, those sort of businesses, we have to trust the people we deal with. And if you don't have the trust in an organization, that could be the end of them.
Absolutely. They've already had several clinics and practices shut down because of ransomware attacks. I mean, this is not unexpected. And I have not seen any hospitals shut down because of ransomware attacks. However, with the rapid rate of consolidation in healthcare, which I think is going to accelerate and continue through this year and next, I believe that you will not see hospitals going out of business. You will see mergers and acquisitions happen because of health systems and hospitals getting ransomware attacks, however.
Well, that's a good point, right? They're going to consolidate resources to help themselves. Now, I should have asked you this earlier, but let's go back to it. So, I love my new concierge doctor, who I pay a flat fee, and I can get him on the phone and on a conference call anytime I want instead of driving into the hospital. It's a product of the COVID situation. I didn't like it at first, but I do. They use all kinds of different, quote, secure healthcare software and video conferencing to make it right. Has this added any wrinkles to this whole process? If I'm going to lock down ransomware for a healthcare facility, am I also going to say, by the way, I got your list of all your patients on your Vimeo calls here, and you're going to pay for those guys too? I think it adds a complexity to it.
Absolutely. Your environment extends beyond the four walls. And one of the areas in which healthcare has opportunities for growth in is with the cloud. And the reason I say that is because linking up all the different providers out there's some actually incredibly good and incredibly secure providers of telemedicine services. However, the challenge is, how do you ensure they're secure? And more importantly, how do you ensure the connection from you to them is secure? And that when that patient information comes back, that you're protecting it. Look at what happened in Finland with their mental health services provider getting attacked, and somebody not only ransoming the data, but actually extorting the individual patients themselves with their psychological details. That's not good.
Well, let's close. It's an obvious question. It's a $64,000 question. Can ransomware be stopped? Can we use something like a kill switch to say, boom, stop propagation? Is it all plausible?
I look at it this way. Ransomware has existed since we've had computers. We just called it different things. And I look at it this way. I had somebody, when I first started off in computing, somebody I worked for in 1996 tell me that you're never going to solve the computer security problem because computers are based on what's called the von Neumann architecture, where you are mixing program and user data. And when you do that, you run the risk of intermixing the two, which leads to a significant number of the issues we have with computers, because a lot of the attacks we have out there involve code being injected from the user side to the system side to make computers do things that they are not supposed to do. So that's the root of a number of attacks that we see. Ransomware is in the vein of that type of attack. You will always see a type of attack where somebody is able to get code to run that they should not have run in the first place, and be able to access and hold for hostage data that they should not have been able to do in the first place. However, this is something we're going to have to learn how to address by better security practices, because unless we come up with a new paradigm for computing tomorrow and are able to propagate it quickly, this is a problem based upon classical computing principles of the human architecture that we just simply cannot change very easily. And the person that does change it will literally get a Nobel Prize for doing so.
Excellent thoughts, Mr. Mitch Parker. He's the CISO of Indiana University Healthcare. Mr. Mitch, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your thoughts and insights, and good luck at RSA.
Thank you very much.